Welcome in to Big Ten today on a Thursday. We are fueled by Gatorade. Great to have you with us, Dave Revson and Jake Butt, as we look forward to what figures to be a really fun weekend in the Big Ten, particularly, frankly, on our airwaves.
Oh, they've all been great. This weekend's going to be special. Game day, going to Bloomington to see if Indiana can do it with their backup quarterback. And then I feel lucky and grateful. I get to call Michigan State this weekend. That is like a broadcaster's dream. I understand it doesn't have conference title implications, but that's the most underrated rivalry in the game. It's going to be physical, trench play, Jonathan Smith versus Sharon Moore. That's just one of many great games this weekend.
It should be fabulous. And again, Indiana's been in the national spotlight. We've had tailgate there. The Big Noon crew has been there. They're in the spotlight again this week, and they are our big story. As you are likely aware, Indiana isn't just 7-0. The Hoosiers are 7-0 in emphatic fashion. They lead the nation in point differential, having outscored their first 7 opponents by 35 points per game. It's 5 touchdowns, with all their wins coming by double-digit margins, the longest such streak in school history. And I got to say, Jake, to me, this is why I love sports. I think dynasties are great and fabulous teams that we talk about for years to come. But I love the unexpected stories. I love teams that come out of nowhere. I think that's what makes sports truly great. And I will go back to Curt Cignetti, his first day on the job. He comes to the Big Ten championship game last year. He sits down on the set with Jerry and Howard and me, and he says, we're going to be back here next year. And when he walked away, I thought to myself, look, I think this guy's really good and he's going to win, but I don't think he understands what he's getting into. You don't just turn around a team in the Big Ten in 1 year. I was wrong. He was right. I don't know whether they'll be there or not. They may or may not. We'll see what happens here down the stretch. But he has far exceeded anything that I thought he would do. It's as good a coaching performance as we've ever seen in this league.
That's where I'm at with this. I think they're the best coached team in college football. Their film is a gift to watch. It's like a coach's dream where, I just tell you this, say you're running outside zone to the right. If you're on the backside as a tight end, you don't take a play off, but your block isn't really impactful and you might not play like your life depends on it. You will not find that on the Hoosiers film. Every single player is playing as if it's the final play of the national championship. It is beautiful to watch. And I'm looking at Indiana almost like a freight train, Dave. This is the analogy I've come up with. If you're driving your car down the highway, you can change lanes or you can turn left or right. But a freight train, it's a singular track, right? So there's clarity on their destination. That's Cignetti telling you, we'll be back here. Clarity on their destination. But then there's systems in place that support that journey. That's Cignetti bringing in his support staff that he's been with for so long. So there's alignment in their culture too. The other piece of this is you have to be great teachers in today's game. When you talk about roster turnover every single year, they brought in obviously a number of transfer guys, and the guys that stayed aren't familiar with Cignetti's system. So there's clarity on destination, there's systems in place, and then they're great teachers, which has allowed them to play fast. And basically, they've been pulverizing anyone or any team that stands in their way. That was so shocking, beyond shocking, what they did to a very good Nebraska defense. Tony White and Matt Rule were shocked. And this comes all the way back around to the storyline this week is Curtis Rourke is out, in comes Taven Jackson. What do you do with the backup quarterback? Everything I just said is why I'm confident in the Hoosiers, because they have clarity in systems, in alignment. You look at that game last week versus Nebraska, he was 7 for 8, 91 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. The only incompletion on the day was a drop on third down that should have been a 30-yard reception. Here's the fun thing. That's their only drop all season, okay? So they don't make mistakes either. That was their only drop all season. This is true for every quarterback, but especially a backup. You want to give him easy completions. You want to present clean pictures, get the ball out of his hands quick, and build his confidence. They passed that. They were 100% perfect doing that last week against an elite Nebraska defense. That's why I'm so confident. When you talk about a starting quarterback or a backup, it's about the 10 guys around him, and they are playing at such a high level right now. So I say they're the best coached team in college football, and they're a joy to watch.
He has done a remarkable job. A little historical perspective. A win on Saturday would be his 8th. It would tie him for the most ever for first-year IU
Amazing.
Head coach. 1905, James Sheldon won 8 games. It was a little different time. Yes. James Sheldon was also teaching at the law school and would coach the basketball team and the football team simultaneously a couple of years later. So essentially no one's ever done what Curt Cignetti is doing. It's amazing. Let's dive into this week's matchup, and we will do it with our Gatorade game leaders. Interesting side note to this game here, Jake. The Huskies and Hoosiers are 2 of just 3 teams in the Big Ten who have outgained their opponent in all 3 games. The issue for UW is a lot of empty yards. They're 23rd in the nation in total offense, but they're just 93rd in scoring. So they're kind of getting in their own way. 15th in the Big Ten in percentage of red zone drives that end in a touchdown. So Washington perhaps a little more formidable than the record might suggest, at least based on those offensive yards. What are you watching here in this game?
That's why this matchup's going to be so fun, because Washington's a team. You take the Iowa game, and aside from that, like they really should be a one-loss team. That Iowa game was the only game where they really kind of got dominated from start to finish. And to back up what you're saying, they're a team that beats themselves. The penalties are extremely telling this year. They're one of the most penalized team in the conference, one of the most penalized teams in the country. You see that graphic right there, the difference in the wins and the losses. And I'll just take the Michigan game, for example, probably their best win of the season. They had 2 penalties for 20 yards in that game, right? So Washington has to get out of Washington's way before they worry about beating Indiana. From an X's and O's standpoint, I'll go back to, I'm really excited to see Steve Belichick, the Huskies defensive coordinator. When you talk about the name Belichick versus young backup quarterback, that's always going to make for a fun matchup.
Yes.
The difference between Taven Jackson and Curtis Rourke, though, is Jackson is a very dynamic athlete and runner. And Indiana runs that modern triple option. It's the read option where he can pull it. He can also dump it out to the flat on effectively what's a screen. You know, his ability to run, I think, is going to be the difference in this game. And, you know, just talking to defensive coordinators on a week-to-week basis, that's the one thing that keeps them up at night, is when a quarterback has the ability to beat you with his feet.
And he certainly can, as you said. I mean, this offense has been so good. They punted once against Nebraska, the #1 scoring defense in the country. While we're on the topic of quarterbacks in this game, this is the Michael Penix Bowl, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's the school that he left behind versus the school that he led to the playoff last year. Penix went on the record saying he is rooting for Washington in this game, but he still feels proud of his Indiana degree, feels proud of what they did there. Again, a reminder, and we'll remind you many times, that game is on the Big Ten Network. It kicks off at noon Eastern Time on Saturday. This level, but it's a pretty good story as well. Illini going to Oregon. They've beaten 3 ranked teams already. They had lost 32 of their last 34 against ranked teams entering the season, and now they've won 3. It made a huge challenge against the Ducks, who are #1 for the first time in a dozen years, and have won 35 of their last 36 at home. Illinois has 3 wins all time against #1, but just 1 in the last 60 years. They topped Ohio State 28-21 in Columbus in 2007, a win that propelled them to the Rose Bowl. Juice Williams threw 4 TD passes. Our friend and colleague Jay Lehman led in inspired defensive performances. One of the more memorable games in what was a year of crazy upsets, 2007 in college football. So what would it take for the Illini to pull off a similar shocker on Saturday in Eugene?
The good thing for Illinois is that they're really battle-tested. Okay, they've played in a number of big games, high-stakes games, and they've come out on the right side. Of course, the loss to Penn State aside, they are battle-tested. And I think that matters, especially when you're going on the road, because Brett Bielema can look at his locker room and say, guys, you've been here, you've done it, and you've won games. And they can look at him and say, you're absolutely right, coach. But the truth of the matter is, from a talent standpoint, X's and O's, you know, Oregon is the more talented team, the more dynamic team. That's why they're the #1 team in the country. So if you're Illinois, you need to do something to tilt the odds in your favor. Turnovers is what I'm looking at. When you think about the making of an upset, it's turnovers. The good thing is that's what Illinois does this year. #3 in the conference in turnovers, #1 in forced fumbles. Turnovers are tricky because at some level there is a little bit of luck involved, but you still have to execute when you're given opportunities. Forced fumbles is different. Take that Michigan game last week. There's a peanut punch, which is clear as day. We installed that from Pee Wee football. And then the tackle on Donovan Edwards, which is helmet right on the football, wrap up, the ball comes out. This has become their defensive identity. By a ton of metrics, they're not an elite defense, but they're opportunistic and take the ball away. And we've seen at times Dylan Gabriel be a little bit loose with his decision making, right?
particularly in the red zone.
Particularly so that is the fork in the road for this game. Can Illinois force some turnovers? I think they want to get pressure on him, but man, that Oregon offensive line, aside of the first few weeks, they have been stout. He didn't even get touched against the Buckeyes.
That is an area where Illinois has been pretty good. And as you say, early in the year, it felt like it was an area where Oregon was vulnerable. It has not been the case. I guess I'm worried about the other side from Illinois' point of view. Can you protect Luke Altmaier? I know he's really good with his legs, but they've given up the most tackles for loss of any team in the Big Ten. Brett Bielema has expressed concern over this offensive line at a couple different points this year during press availability. And Oregon, I mean, that defensive line can absolutely get after it.
Yeah,
and that is an area where it feels like Illinois got to be at its absolute best, in my mind, to have a chance to win this game.
Absolutely. And that's been the storyline, even going back to the offseason, where Altmaier is one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the nation.
Yes.
Last year, they've improved. Obviously, this is going to be a huge, huge test. The good thing is, in a matchup I'm excited for, is he's got two big-time outside wide receivers in Pat Bryant and Zariah Franklin. I'm excited to see what those guys do because they're talented enough in the way they're built in terms of long, great height, attacking the football. You can throw them one-on-one balls, and they'll come down with it. You can get that ball up and out quick before the Oregon pass rush can get to you. Can you live on that for 60 minutes is the question. But another thing I like about Altmaier is he will rip your heart out in terms of running. Like he's that type of quarterback that's just so frustrating because you can play great defense for 5 seconds and he'll squirm through the protection and run and move the chains. Got to do that. He's going to have to do that a ton of times this game. And again, I'm excited to see the Ducks defense because they've been dynamic this entire year. And when you're playing a quarterback like Altmaier, it's going to be a great test.
Altmaier's made really good decisions with the ball this year as well. Last year he put it in harm's way a lot. Interceptions were a huge problem. Hasn't been the case this year. He's not afraid to use his athleticism. He's a great athlete.
Yeah.
Tuck the ball away, get some yardage. Illinois' offense hasn't been great. I mean, even in that Michigan game, right? I mean, you're well under 300 yards of offense. Penn State game, 2 of the last 3 games have been under 270 yards. So we'll see if they can get it going in a hostile environment. But again, another fun one. A very intriguing game. A little experience in that rivalry game. Caught a 2-point conversion in 2014. A game the Spartans won 35-11. That an MSU team that finished the season ranked 5th. The next year, the Spartans made the college football playoff, and their win over Michigan was one of the craziest of all time. The famed trouble with the snap play that resulted in Jalen Watts-Jackson scoring a TD on the final play of the game. The next year, though, things went the way of the Maize and Blue, a 32-23 win, thanks in part to their Mackey Award-winning tight end, the best in his position in the country, hauling one in there, one of his 3 catches. That one setting up a Davion Smith TD run. So, Jake, you know this rivalry just a little bit.
Yes. It's think about the emotional roller coaster I just went on from that game. Only this game could do that to you.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like a spiritual or like psychedelic experience. Like when you're down on the field, nothing else exists outside of the stadium. It is Michigan versus Michigan State. It's big brother versus little brother. If you win, you get the right to say you're big brother. It is a physical rivalry. 48 out of the last 54 winners have won the run game. It tells you everything you need to know about this game. And what's really interesting is this game doesn't have conference title implications. We understand. But make no mistake about it, critically important. It's the new era of the next chapter in this rivalry, Jonathan Smith, Sharon Moore. For Michigan specifically, we are talking about if you don't win this, it's going to be tough to get to a bowl game. Yes, we're saying that after winning a national championship. For Jonathan Smith and Michigan State, they've been building and building and building. And when they played Iowa last week, it was their best game all season. Best offensive line performance I've seen in half a decade. Childs looked comfortable. The run game got going, 212 yards on the ground. They shut down Caleb Johnson outside a 175-yard touchdown. So you see, Michigan State is starting to peak at this right time where Michigan is at a crossroads. Vulnerable, or they can say, what we've done in the past is not us. And in a game like this, nothing that you've done in the past matters. Anything can happen. anything's on the table. It's what makes it such a fun rivalry.
It's fabulous, and I'm so excited for you that you get a chance to call it on our airwaves on Saturday night. Excited for us to have it on our air. You set out the stakes and what's going on with both of these teams. Michigan, it feels like they're searching for answers. The quarterback spot, but I think to a certain extent with the defense as well, although the defense probably played well enough to win against Illinois. The issues there were offensive. And then Michigan State, I mean, talk about a team that got better in the bye week, Jake.
Yeah.
Holy cow. I mean, the lines of scrimmage, we were sitting on our set 10 feet from here on Saturday and talking about Iowa, Michigan State. Man, it just feels like a really tough matchup for Michigan State because of their struggles on the line of scrimmage. And then they owned the line of scrimmage against the Hawkeyes. So what do you see as the key matchup in this game?
It's the line of scrimmage. We know Michigan, especially with the quarterback situation, they have got to run the ball. I think the formula last week versus Illinois, you can't throw the ball 30-plus times a game regardless of who's under center. You got to run the ball 30 to 40 times a game. And Khalil Mulling specifically, he's your star. Let's just call it what it is. He needs 25-plus carries on the ground this weekend. What was beautiful to see for Michigan State is, we showed that film back when I was playing against them. Their identity never really wavered. It was a physical, tough, downhill defense. They were going to beat you up. And then it was a physical offensive line and a run game that allowed their quarterbacks to get into play action. They haven't had an identity even close to that the past few years. That's what Jonathan Smith is working towards establishing. And versus Iowa, it was a positive step in that direction. We just talked to the coaches last night. They basically brought the offensive line together in the bye week and challenged them to say, like, hey, evaluate your process, evaluate your practice. What do you want to be this year? And they said the bye week practice and the practice leading up to Iowa was the best they'd seen all season. And then that's why that win is so valuable, because it confirms to those guys, hey, if we do it this way, we're going to succeed. So that's going to be this game. Which team can run the ball? Which team can control the clock? Which defense can win up front in the trenches?
It's interesting because Michigan State, that was the identity under Mark D'Antonio, as you well know. You played against Mark D'Antonio teams, and they had really good offensive lines. And then it just feels like, for whatever reason, the 1 year with Kenneth Walker, who was just so fabulous.
He just solves problems.
Yes, he could turn a 1 yard gain into a 30-yard gain. But it has felt like, aside from that year, they've been in decline on the offensive line for a while now. I mean, you have to go back and look at what year. Maybe it's 8 years. I mean, I just feel like kind of it hasn't been a strength in a long time, and it feels like that's what Jonathan Smith wants it to look like. And last week was the first week where I felt like, okay, that might be their identity. It might be their identity sooner rather than later. So really interesting game there, one they're playing under the lights. Penn State with the lights as well, and the Badgers, 3 straight wins since falling at USC, scoring up more than 17 points per game. Defense has been incredible in that stretch. They've allowed a total of 16 points in the wins over Purdue, Rutgers, and Northwestern. It is fair to point out those 3 programs have combined for 2 Big Ten wins, or 1 fewer than this week's opponent, Penn State. You saw Wisconsin against Northwestern on Saturday on the lakefront here, not far from here up in Evanston. What would it take for the Badgers to take that performance, bring it up to Madison, and turn it into a win over Penn State?
Well, can we pull that graphic back up? Because
I'm not in control of that, but I think it can be done.
Maybe, can you wave your wand? Can we get that graphic back up? Because there
it is. Look at that.
Look at that bottom row right there. That's the key.
Right.
Rush yards per game.
Right.
Nearly plus 100 in this last run. And that is the key, because you think about the transition from to bring in Luke Fickell and Phil Longo. It's the air raid system. So we're expecting to see them, and they've been trying to throw the ball and find their identity in that game. And it's come all the way back around now to their identity is running the football. They got 2 tackles that are 6'7", 6'8", 300-plus pounds. The guards and center are nasty on the interior. Ches Malusi steps away from the team to take care of his health, and all of a sudden Tawi Walker is getting the lion's share of those carries. They have been dominant up front with their gap schemes and pulling guys around. Their offense is like a Jenga tower, okay? I like what Braden Locke's doing. He gets comfortable in the RPO games and then the play action. Now he's been taking shots to Vinny Anthony downfield, and they've been hitting there. But the foundation that makes all of this work, his confidence grows when they're able to run the football. That's the matchup here for Penn State. The secondary is really the weak point, but you have to run the ball first to get into the RPO and play action for this to all work for Braden Locke, Wisconsin, and Tawi Walker.
Yeah, it's been pretty cool. I mean, I think it's a similar story to what we were talking about with Michigan State, where it feels like the offensive line has just gained confidence here. I know the running backs get a lot of the credit, and as you said, Walker's been really good, but you pointed out offensive line, those tackles. I mean, this just looks the part.
Yes.
And don't forget the tight ends.
Can't forget the tight ends.
Can't forget the tight ends.
They're blocking their butts off, too.
Absolutely. This looks the part of a vintage Wisconsin offensive line. They've kind of, again, as you say, they're trying to do different things philosophically in the pass game in particular, but they're still kind of looking at that bread and butter as being the run game. I'm interested in whether the defense is really this good.
Yeah.
And it will get tested against Andy Kotelnicki and Penn State. And we've seen what they've done, the creativity, the use of Tyler Warren. They're a more explosive offense than they were in the past. We know how good both those running backs are. So what do you think about that part of the matchup? What do you think about Wisconsin 16 points over 3 games, but now going up against a pretty explosive and potent offense?
Yeah, I'm excited to see really just Drew Aller and just the journey he's taken to get to this moment. A 5-star that, a lot of Penn State fans felt he was going to be the savior and the guy to unlock that next level of Penn State greatness. And it's kind of been a slow start to get there. And then in comes Kotelnicki, and it looks like he's unlocked that next level of Drew Aller's potential. That final drive to tie the game up on the road versus USC showed me a lot. Yep. He had some turnovers, he had some mistakes in that game, but make no mistake about it, a 4th and 10 conversion, a 4th and 7 conversion, he's running the ball. That was a big boy moment for him, and you cannot discredit what that does for his confidence. This is going to be another game. You're talking about going on the road to a hostile environment, a team that's rolling, their fan base is believing. This falls on the quarterback's shoulders. When Drew Aller enters that huddle, there's 10 other guys looking at him, and they want to see in his eyes, do you believe you're the guy to bring us home? And I think that final drive last week to ultimately tie the game and win the game does a lot in that category.
And the thing I loved about it was Drew Aller hasn't thrown interceptions in his career, right? I think he had 3 going into that game, and he equaled that total. One of them was a Hail Mary, so you disregard that. But at the point of that drive, right, you've had 2 really important interceptions, something you haven't done in your career. And instead of being shaken by it and questioning who you are, he comes through on 2 huge 4th down passes to Julian Fleming, who hadn't really been
poetic.
A huge factor.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is a huge stretch for them, right? The next 2 weeks, you've got Wisconsin, Ohio State. Honestly, if you win one of those, you're probably in really good shape. If somehow you win them both, I mean, that changes everything. But you look at the projections for the playoff right now, they're more than 90% in most of these projections to make the playoff. If you win in Madison, you're in really, really good shape.
To win both of those, I mean, we change our perception of Penn State.
Absolutely.
It's never been, Penn State wins all the games they're supposed to win, right? And then they've fallen short in these big moments. That's why this is such a big game. Really for James Franklin specifically, that's why he goes and gets Kotelnicki. That's what I'm excited to see here.
I think this is the similar storyline. Maybe it's a week from now with Penn State, although, obviously you have to get through Wisconsin to make that Ohio State game that big. But can you win a game of that magnitude? And same for Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Right? Luke Fickell, I mean, okay, it's better here these last 3 weeks. Haven't beaten a ranked team yet in Wisconsin. This is an opportunity to do that in a huge way and maybe accelerate that process. I mean, you think about what we were thinking about them a month ago.
Right.
After that USC game and what we're thinking about them now, significantly different, but it could be night and day different were they to knock off the Nittany Lions. Remember, this is year 1 of the 12-team playoff in college football. It is going to be wild. We get the first playoff rankings in 12 days. Here's how the athletic sees it as of now, and it could not be better for the Big Ten. 4 teams in the bracket, most of any conference. Oregon, the top seed, Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana, all in the field of 12. Buckeyes and Nittany Lions would host opening round games, while the Hoosiers would head on the road to Texas. And Fox Sports lead game analyst Joel Klatt joins us now. And Joel, I want to start with Indiana. You saw them, you had them on Big Noon last week against Nebraska, absolutely annihilated the Huskers. What impressed you the most about Indiana?
Easy. Their ability to run the football and then their defense overall. Those were two question marks for me coming in, to be honest with you. I didn't know if the defense was going to be for real. I thought that Rourke and that passing game and the skill position players on offense were very good players. They had been very productive previously. But remember, the offensive line for Indiana, they all came back. They weren't transfers. Other than Weddick at right tackle, coming from Wisconsin. But Rev, I didn't know if they could run the football consistently. Did it have to be in the RPO? Could they really win the line of scrimmage? And they were facing what I would consider to be one of the better run defenses with Ty Robinson and Hutmaker up front. This is a Nebraska team that had not given up a rushing touchdown, and Indiana owned them running the football. To me, that was clearly the most impressive part. And then on the defensive side, they reminded me, now listen, Michigan's defense was the best in the country last year. So it's not necessarily like Michigan from last year, but what it does remind me of kind of a Michigan-Iowa philosophy in that they're not going to borrow from parts of their defense to make themselves structurally weak in order to create pressure. So when they do that, they maintain their layers, and it becomes very hard to just drive the football down the field. So this is another way of saying this is they're going to force you to snap it 11 or 12 times in order to score rather than 4 or 5 times. And those layers and that combination of running the football, the layers on defense, I came away from that. I'm driving away from Bloomington last week, and I'm telling everybody in the car, I'm like, hey guys, that is easily a top 10 team, and that's a team that could go to Indianapolis and play for the Big Ten championship. Like, they're that good, and I thought they were that impressive.
I agree with you. I saw you had them in the top 10 in your poll this week. What's the lesson here in Cignetti's success? Like, to do this in year one, what about it could other programs that are looking to turn things around emulate?
Yeah, honestly, a lot. I mean, you can copy this. This is what's unfortunate for Cignetti is yes, there's part of that is unique to him and his approach and the fact that he is so persistent in adhering to the details and the process of what he has and the standards of what he has. So he's obviously just a really good football coach and has been everywhere that he's been as a head coach. So I don't want to minimize what he has done, whether it's previously or here at Indiana. However, this blueprint that he had to construct the roster is absolutely transferable to anybody that wants to use it. And it boils down to this equation. Curt Cignetti, he prioritized production over potential in the transfer portal. It didn't matter how many stars you had coming out of high school. It mattered if you produced for a good football team in previous years. And if you wanted to come up and test those skills at what is considered to be a higher level, then go ahead and come up here. Now, obviously, 9 of those guys being from JMU under his own roof where he was previously at helps. But that's not Rourke. That's not some of these other guys. And you're starting to see that if you're an all-conference player in the MAC, you can play in the Big Ten. There's no doubt. And if you can produce at a high level at these other schools in the group of 5, you can come in and be an impact player. And so this idea for anybody that's trying to build, whether it's one side of the football, the other side of the football, or the entire roster, you can copy what he did, prioritizing, again, the strategy of production over potential.
What do you make of Nebraska coming out of that game? Was it just a really bad day, or are they a little further behind than we thought they were?
Maybe both. I think maybe both can be true because yes, it was a bad day. And you're going to have those, by the way, when you start a true freshman at quarterback. And I thought that Dylan did some nice things at the quarterback position, and he made some mistakes at that position. What I was more alarmed at, I'll go back to my first answer, was that they got owned at the line of scrimmage, and more specifically, their defensive line got owned at the line of scrimmage. That's the side of the football that Rev, you, I, everybody that covered this conference, this league, and this team, we were surprised because that's the veteran side of the football. That's the side of the football with Tony White that has been the most consistent and the one that they could really rely on. And so the fact that it played that poorly against Indiana on the road, that was quite alarming. And now I'll have them moving forward this week against Ohio State.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that game. They definitely get the bad timing award, Nebraska, because you don't get a chance to get your legs back under. You go to Columbus, you take on Ohio State. The Buckeyes are coming off a bye. They're probably in a bad mood after what happened in Eugene. What are you most interested in seeing from Ohio State's point of view in their first game since that loss?
So two things. I think that their ability to sustain the run game, because I don't think they did a good job of that against Oregon. You know, they had the one long run from Travion Henderson, but overall, it wasn't a day in which they really controlled the game with their offensive line and their backs. So do they lean more heavily into that? I suspect that they will, in particular, based on what they saw last week from Nebraska with Indiana being able to run the football. And then the next part of this is they have to get pressure on the quarterback. And the reason that I laugh is that they could probably use the same strategy that they used against Oregon, and they could probably get to Raiola, okay? Because let's face it, like, Nebraska's offensive line has been banged up. They lost two of their veteran tackles. They're down to their third offensive tackle at left tackle, Gatula. And it's going to be a tough matchup for them. So they could probably just rush four straight ahead and get to the quarterback, and then everyone would be like, well, okay, we fixed the pressure issues. But in reality, we don't really know if the pressure issues have been fixed, because when it comes to matchup games and the big games, in particular the ones that they've lost, the pass rush has disappeared over the last few years. I think a lot has been written about this and talked about this, but this really is why they've been giving up these big plays. 8 explosive plays they gave up against Oregon, in large part because they didn't get to the quarterback and Dylan Gabriel. So for me, Rev, I want to see, like, is there more creative schematics in terms of pressure and how they're getting to the quarterback? Are they stunting more? Are they going to twist more? Are they going to add the jack position, which is kind of a mainstay in Jim Knowles' defense prior to Ohio State? Because remember, Jim Knowles, when he was at Oklahoma State, without great pass rushers, led the country in pressures and sacks his last year. And this is not really the scheme that he used at Oklahoma State. It's a hybrid of that. So I'm interested to see if something changes on the defensive side.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. And as you mentioned, that's your game, big noon. You guys will be there in Columbus. I do want to ask you real quick before I let you go about our primetime game here on the Big Ten Network.
Yeah.
We got Michigan and Michigan State, two teams that feel like they're on different trajectories. I mean, man, Michigan State played really well, particularly at the line of scrimmage against Iowa. We know what's going on here with Michigan. What does this game mean in your mind to two first-year head coaches at those respective programs?
Oh my gosh. I mean, this is monumental because of the nature of the rivalry. Rev, I would venture out and just say, like, for Michigan and Sharon Moore, this is a must. This is a must. You cannot, the year after winning the national championship, and with everything that went on specifically that week last year, and you remember, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is when it all came out, right? And then they went up there and they shut them out and they beat them down. You cannot go out there and lose to a first-year head coach at Michigan State. I just don't think that I don't think that the narrative will survive. And maybe it will, but Jonathan Smith is a really good football coach, and this Michigan State team is sound, and they beat Iowa at their own game, and it's going to be a difficult game for Michigan. There's no doubt about it, and this is a program right now that is reeling a little bit, and I will just say this about Michigan. There's a good chance that it gets worse before it gets better for Michigan. Think about it from the schedule that they've got going on in the back half of the year, which is incredibly difficult, and they still don't know what's going on at quarterback and on their offensive side. And in the offseason, they're going to lose 4 first-round draft picks. So right now, like, we are in a period, in a pocket, where right now for Michigan, it doesn't look good, and in all likelihood, it could get worse before it gets better.
That should be a really interesting game on Saturday night at the Big House. And as you say, a lot of pressure, no doubt, on the Maize and Blue. This is a huge weekend in the Big Ten. Really looking forward to it. Can't wait to hear your call with Gus and Jenny, big noon on Saturday. Always appreciate your time. Thanks, Joel.
Yeah, thanks, man. Good to be here.
Why is the
See, this specific duck was a bad duck. See, he was a long life Ohio State Buckeye fan. And, you know, with a lot of training and a lot of beating into him, he became Oregon's biggest supporter. Let's go Ducks! Ain't that right?
Oh my goodness.
There we go. All right.
Some good hijinks there. Taekwon Lewis forced to pay off a bet with DeForest Buckner of the Colts. That bring back some memories for you?
It does, and hey, maybe it comes full circle for the Buckeyes because my rookie year in Denver, they do the rookie haircuts, and Jeff Hireman, the Ohio State tight end, he shaved a block O in the back of my head, and my record versus Ohio State, which is not pretty. Like you said, this is what we love about college sports, right? The spirit, the emotion. Sometimes you're on the right side, sometimes you're on the wrong side.
Lewis's team will try to bounce back this week. They've got a game against Nebraska. The Huskers coming off just a rough loss to Indiana. I mean, as thorough a beatdown as you can possibly experience. So both of these teams trying to bounce back. What are you most interested in seeing here?
The response. And Coach Harbaugh would always say when we'd lose games, he'd say it in the locker room right after the loss, and he would say, somebody has to pay, okay? Like the remedy for a loss, he'd say the medicine is on the field to go get a win. Somebody has to pay. And I think for Ohio State, expectations are kind of a double-edged sword, and I was really curious to see what happens if they did lose a game, because we spent all offseason talking about it's the most talented roster in this century, and wouldn't have surprised anyone for them to have gone undefeated and won a national title, and they lose a heartbreaker by 1 point on the road. This is a veteran team that has experienced these losses before. I'm excited to see the emotions of the Buckeyes when they take the field. I'm looking at the trenches for them as well, and I felt specifically on the defensive side of the ball, Ryan Day and his presser almost like challenged Jim Knowles a little bit for that D-line to be as dominant as they had been all year, and to not only really not get a sack on Gabriel, they didn't touch him. That they're too good for that to ever be the case in a big game. So I think that's the game plan. And the same thing that Joel said, the Buckeyes commit to running the ball. I mean, gosh, that backfield is so talented. The offensive line has been playing great. They got to commit to running the ball. And for Nebraska, it's the exact same thing. Tony White, it's a big week for him. Ohio State runs a very similar offense to the Hoosiers. So you'd say, great, well, you got to experience it a little bit last week, except for the results of the game, right? So maybe not so great. But I feel for Tony White, that is much more the outlier than a need for me to change my perception of that defense.
It's fascinating to see the way that Indiana ran them over. I mean, you think about this defense, they forced one punt. They had allowed 68 points in their first 6 games, and they give up 56 to Indiana. And I guess what you're trying to convince your guys is that it is an outlier, right? But the issue is that you're coming up against equally as potent an offense. You just hate to see all of the good things that have happened at Nebraska kind of be called into question here, but the timing's really, really bad. And can you kind of get your feet back under you? Can you play well, maybe pull off a stunning upset? But even if you just play well in this game, that sets you up then. You got to make a bowl. You got to figure out a way to win a game here or two down the stretch. And that's where I think the challenge is here for Matt Rule.
That's a challenge, yeah, exactly. For Matt Rule, like part of this is it's psychology. Like you're changing the perception of Nebraska. The past half decade, it's heartbreaking losses in the same fashion, turnovers. They certainly had a ton of turnovers. This one was just a butt whooping from the start. Can you use that to your advantage, right? It's good to play football angry and ticked off. If you're Nebraska, you got to say that is absolutely not us, and be hungry to go prove that against one of the best offenses in the country in the Buckeyes.
Well, they will certainly have their chance to do that. Again, that game in Columbus. Saturday, the middle of our 3 games here on the Big Ten Network, Iowa and Northwestern. We talked about Iowa not playing well at all last time out. Neither did Northwestern. Again, you saw them against Wisconsin. This has been a great series in recent years. I mean, you look just at the last 8 games, it's 4-4. 6 of those 8 games decided by a touchdown or less. It feels like a low-scoring game again, really, partly because the defense has been good, but partly because the offenses, frankly, haven't, outside of one performance by Iowa against Washington, against an elite opponent, where they did put up 40 points. And Northwestern had its moments, I suppose, against Maryland. But this feels like a defensive struggle. Yeah. What do you think ultimately decides it?
Well, I just think, before I even get to that, I just think this is such an important game for both teams. For Northwestern, when you're talking about getting to a bowl game, you pretty much have got to win this one. Otherwise, that's not likely to happen. And for Iowa, I just want to figure out who they are this year. Is Iowa the team that, ran all over Washington and rolled to a comfortable victory? Or are you the team that let Michigan State revive their season by running it for 200 yards again? The defense has been shocking to me this year.
Yeah, me too.
I felt they'd be one of the top 10 units in college football, and they haven't been to that standard.
And honestly, Jake, they're not a terrible
they're not.
defense by any stretch. They're a good defense or an above-average defense significantly. The issue is the margin for error has been pretty slim just because of where they are in the pass game. And they're a much better run team than they were a year ago, and the offensive line is way better. But this has kind of always been a little bit maybe of the fear in the back of your mind is if they don't play absolutely on point defensively, the offense has to be better than it's been.
Yeah, we were wondering if the dam would eventually break. And it's a credit to Phil Parker how high the expectations are of those defense. Not a bad defense, but definitely not playing to their standard. So and Northwestern had a good defense too. And so
they've only allowed more than 24 points in regulation one time in 7 games.
Wisconsin ran all over them. Like it was effortless for them to run the football. Michigan State ran all over Iowa. When you're talking about a low-scoring game, like which team can successfully run the ball, which team can successfully stop the run? Northwestern's got to get out of their own way too. Some of the mistakes and you talk about late half or situational decision making and execution. Like again, so much of the middle of the conference it's not about adding anything. It's about subtracting the self-inflicted wounds. That's the difference between a number of these teams. They've just continued to beat themselves. Of course, Northwestern did it once again last weekend.
Literally gave away 7 points right before halftime.
And Wisconsin gets the ball coming out of half.
Gave them away with bizarre and kind of tried to do the same thing against Maryland.
Yes.
They dodged a bullet. The Terps missed a field goal. But yeah, the end of half play calling has been a little strange. Tonight, volleyball on the Big Ten Network. Third-ranked Penn State clashing with UCLA. Then number 16 USC hosts Michigan State. A West Coast volleyball doubleheader begins at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific, only on the Big Ten Network and always on the Fox Sports app. Week 9 in the Big Ten. We've already discussed 6 of the 8 games, so my math tells me there are still 2 left. You got Maryland and Minnesota, both with some momentum. But let's start with the game tomorrow night at the Coliseum. 2 teams that could really use a win, Rutgers and USC, right after the World Series on Fox. How do you see this one?
Man, both teams, absolutely. Both coaches need a win, and for different reasons. Rutgers, just the opportunity they had, and to now have dropped games the way they have is that loss versus UCLA, credit to Deshaun Foster. One of the more disappointing losses of the season. But for USC, I've just been following the discord in their fan base and how frustrating it's been. And I'm just reminded, Dave, when Jim Harbaugh first got to Michigan, we went 7-6. We lost 5 of those games by a total of 11 points. We were losing in the third, fourth quarter. So we had those famous 4-hour practices in spring. And Jim would blow the horn at the 2.5-hour mark and bring everybody up. And he would just announce to the team, hey, I watched every one of your games. This 2.5-hour mark is where you lost all of your games. And he reminded us that we needed to push our minds, our bodies, and spirits to start to win. Like, it feels like that is the missing ingredient for Lincoln Riley. It's not X's and O's or anything at this point. He's got to start to something mental or emotional for this roster. For them to continually lose games like this, I know it's so frustrating. Something has to change, and it really starts at the top with his leadership to get these guys to start to finish games.
To your point, all 4 of their losses they have led in the fourth quarter. So just have not
historically devastating.
Have not been able to finish off games outside of the Wisconsin game where they did finish off, where they did play a really good second half. How can you channel that? That becomes the challenge, no doubt. USC coming off a loss to Maryland. What stands out about the Terps in this matchup with Minnesota, 2 teams that have to be feeling really good about themselves?
To watch the emotion of Billy Edwards and the team, they needed that one. Coach Loxley needed that one. October as a month has not been good to Loxley and the team. So the big question is can you build off of that momentum, right? Sometimes you just need that bounce back to get you going. This is going to be a fun matchup. Billy Edwards has been playing great football all year. I'm excited to see him against that Minnesota passing defense, which has been stout all year too. And PJ, after that USC win, PJ basically said his team has a ton of belief in what they can be this season. So that's what this matchup is about, is 2 teams looking to try to confirm whether or not they are headed in the right direction this year.
And it feels to me like Minnesota has developed a little bit of a clutch gene here,
Yes.
which is what you want. It's a team that does play a lot of close games. They didn't play a great game against UCLA, but when you can win a game without playing well, it's a sign of a really good program. Awani and Jerry tomorrow, plus Don Fisher, the voice of the Hoosiers, giving us some perspective on IU. See you then.